Hello and welcome to Patrick Come Lately Talk Radio. This is Stefan, your host, British by birth, American by choice. The Founding Fathers crafted some remarkable documents that led to the creation of a great country founded on liberty and self-reliance. I have lived in the Euro-socialist nightmare, and I'm doing what I can to return this country to the vision that the Founding Fathers gave us. We need to strive to rebuild that shining city on the hill, for without us, the world has nowhere to turn for freedom. For the next hour, I will be presenting news, views, and guests that help keep the true spirit of America alive. And good evening, good afternoon, or good morning, wherever, whenever you're listening to the show. This is Stefan, your Patrick Come Lately, British by birth, but American by choice, with a very special Christmas show. It is Christmas Eve as I'm recording this show, but I'm sure many of my listeners will be listening to this perhaps over Christmas or on Christmas Day, Boxing Day, or even after Christmas. Wherever, whenever, I'm just glad that you listen to the show. As I said, a special Christmas show, and in the sense of keeping the Christ in Christmas and keeping the commercialism out, this is a special show running without any commercials. So if you do feel like giving me a Christmas present, please listen to the next show and then make use of one of the commercials in the show. I'm sure if there's some useful stuff for you there. But also, of course, remember the show is supported by these commercials. And if you call, I get money. That's the way it works. So for this particular show, I've decided I want to do something a little different, and wanted to look at the whole story of Christmas and just sort of take away, well, not necessarily take away, but just look at some of the myths, some of the things, and just see how it all ties together, because I think there is some reality to the story. Now, there are those of you out there who take everything in the Bible as absolutely literal. I don't think that's going to be the right show for you tonight. I want to look at what was written there and just try and work out how it got there, and what all is involved, and how much might be true and how much might be embellishments that were added later. Remember, we're all it was written by humans. We're all humans, and we remember things differently over time. And if you don't write it down immediately, then, who knows what comes in. So, I want to do that. But before I start on that, one of the reasons for doing this, I was kind of pushed in this direction. I was watching a new show on television, actually through Netflix, about Marco Polo. Now, we all know the stories of Marco Polo, and this was a book that was written, probably about 1600 years after Jesus was supposed to have lived. And there was a book written about the story of an adventurer who went off to China and had a lot of adventures there and came back. Now, as part of watching this story, we also went in and looked at other Marco Polo videos available on the net or at Netflix or at Amazon, etc. And there was one out there by the Smithsonian where they kind of looked at the Marco Polo mystery. And what they basically, it was about a half an hour long, and what they basically said, well, they found that there was a Polo family in Venice around the time that would have been correct for the whole story, but they could never find anything specific about a Polo in China and some of the things that were supposed to have happened. And I sort of looked at that and said, well, yeah, folks, that sounds okay, but it is quite well known that there were trade routes, and the fact that silk was available in Venice around that time, it showed that traders were somehow going along the silk route and trading silk. Now, whether or not people from Venice actually made it to China, it's perhaps not documented, but as much as the Chinese document everything, it's unlikely that they would have documented each and every trader that came there. So my premise is that while there was maybe not a Marco Polo who actually went into China and had all of the adventures, including becoming a governor of one of the states, one of the regions under the Kublai Khan, while that may not have actually happened, I'm sure that there were plenty of traders from Venice who went along the Silk Route and may have had some contact with China, and that book may have been written about that. And that sort of set me thinking, well, could be similar with the Bible, that while, there's some very good stories in there, there is an underpinning of truth to some of it, and there may be other ones which are embellishments that were added for religious reasons, things to kind of bend the story to meet prophecies and things like that. Now, we could spend hours talking about this, and obviously we don't have that much time. So I'm going to go through and we're going to have a look at just a couple of parts of the Bible. And I really want to go to the Gospels of Luke and Matthew and look at their Christmas stories. There are some discrepancies there, but there are also ways to tie those discrepancies together on a practical basis, not on a faith-based basis, but on a practical basis. So let's start with Luke, because that that is probably the most detailed one. And let's go through the sections. I'm going to skip the Annunciation part. In some ways, it's an important part, but I'd like to go with more practical things. So we're going to talk about basically leading up to the birth and what happened after the birth. And it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. And this taxing was first made when Quirinius was the governor of Syria. And all went to be taxed, every one into his city. And Joseph also went up from Galilee, out of the city of Nazareth, into Judea, into the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be taxed with Mary, his espoused wife, being great with child. So that first part, I've always wondered when you see programs about the Christmas story, they don't talk a lot about the fact that there was this decree about all the world being taxed, right? The decree from Caesar Augustus. Now, it turns out that Caesar Augustus did actually have order 3 censuses to be, or censi maybe, to be held. One in 28 BC, one in 6 BC, and one in 14 AD. So though there are three, and that's actually documented because Caesar Augustus saw that as some of the great things that he'd done. And in those days, the census was indeed for taxing, but also it was for registration. A lot of scholars say that that Caesar Augustus was more interested in just finding out how many people were in the Roman Empire and whether their numbers were growing or going down, and that's why he had these three different decrees. So now we've got three of them. Which one of those is the most likely candidate to be the one that took place in the Christmas story? Well, there is a kind of a parenthetical phrase there which says, and this taxing was the first made when Quirinius was governor of Syria. Well, Quirinius was started to be governor of Syria 6-7 AD, and whether he was still there 14 AD, I haven't been able to find out. And 14 AD would be quite late, because in general, obviously, we try and attribute the birth of Jesus to 0 AD, and with some, with some things that go on, people could be slightly less precise, but to be 14 years off seems a lot. So again, most scholars say it's likely that the 6 BC census was the most likely one, because even though the decree was passed in 6 BC, there is a likelihood that it might have taken a year or two for the actual instructions to reach Judea and Galilee at the time. And so by the time that sort of filtered through to the provinces, it might have taken a couple of years. So now we're talking, instead of 6 BC, we're talking about 4 or even 3 BC. And that brings it fairly close to the date that people seem to try and divine after the fact. And that seems more likely. But there is a problem there, that Quirinius was not governor of Syria at that time. So what about the phrase that Luke uses, and this taxing was first made when Quirinius was governor of Syria? Well, that first, in the Greek translation, and we don't know whether Luke wrote it originally in Greek or whether it was in Aramaic and then translated into Greek, but most of our translations are taken from the Greek. And the word that was used there is actually proto or prote. Also has another meaning, less used, but it says prior. So it could be that this phrase should read, and this census was made prior to when Quirinius was governor of Syria. There are some other commentators, other scholars who have said there's evidence that Quirinius may have been in Syria in a different role around about that time, and so they're talking. So Luke was talking about the first census that Quirinius was involved with, even though he was not governor at the time, and kind of got his wording. Again, difficult, but it shows that there is a likelihood that yes, there was a general. There was a general census taking place in the Roman-occupied territories, one that covered all of the Roman world, decreed by Caesar Augustus, and we're talking about 3 or 4 BC, so only 3 or 4 years away from what we think might have been Jesus' birth date. Interesting. So, a fact which perhaps backs up the story. And of course, Luke also talks about that, and all went to be taxed, every one unto his own city. So in those days that was common, that you would go to your city and be registered there. There is another aspect to this, though, and that is that Luke is definitely trying to make a link here, right, between Joseph's family, which Jesus is part of, right, and that's why he goes into Judea, the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David. Now, that's one thing that's kind of important, because many of the prophecies that had gone before and are in the Old Testament of the Bible were talking about someone of the lineage of David that was going to be coming and basically becoming a king over Israel. So, was this something that Luke added just for convenience? Was it the truth? That's something that's going to be a little more difficult. And of course, we know that at the time, Mary was great with child. And so off they went to Bethlehem. And yes, so now let's go to Luke 2:6. And so it was, while they were there, the days were accomplished that she should be delivered. And she brought forth her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling clothes, and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. We'll just go through that particular section first. So we know that she was pregnant. So she delivers her son, and of course the whole story is about the fact, was it in a cave, was it in a shed, was it in a stable? And, you know, why was there no room for them at the inn? Well, most scholars say, first of all, the translation is incorrect. There was no room for them in the inn. Should actually read, there was no room for them in the guest room, or what we would call the guest room. So basically in those times, assuming Joseph would stay with family, and we don't know whether he would be middle class, lower class, obviously living in Nazareth, and if they are living in Bethlehem, they're probably not upper class, because anybody of that level would be in Jerusalem. But anyway, so they could be reasonably well off. They could have a nice large house. But the houses in those days were basically normally 2 stories. The top story was kind of a flat roof with some extra room on it, and that was known as the guest room. This is where they could take stuff off, and guests could also store things that they had brought perhaps with their donkeys or camels. And then on the ground floor, there would be a number of rooms, including one room where the animals lay, so sort of a stable, and one where the family would live. So the question is, so she brought forth her firstborn son, wrapped him in swaddling clothes, and laid him in a manger. So it looks as if, yes, with lots of people coming for this census, it was probably pretty busy, and lots of the family there. This was not an inn. This was most likely a family house, probably Joseph's family. But they may have had to have moved out to the stable to sleep, because it was just so full, and that's why they had the manger where he was laid. So again, we'll never know the answer to that one, but some of the myths, I'm afraid for those of you that have seen the cave in Bethlehem, big question mark about whether or not that is actually correct. This was something that Emperor Constantine's mother went to the Holy Land to try and find out as much about Jesus, and remember this is 300-400 years afterwards. And she decreed that this cave was where he'd been born. But anyway, again, probably a bit of a myth, more likely in a house. And the house comes back in some of our later discussions. There were in the same country shepherds abiding in their fields, keeping watch over their flocks by night. this kind of gives us an indication when Jesus might have been born, because at that time, most scholars say it was likely that sort of from April to November is when the shepherds would go out and live in the fields and watch over their flocks, whilst in the winter they would probably bring them back to their houses. Others say no, the weather was such that they could do it 12 months of the year, but I think the consensus is really that it's likely that it was in the April-November time frame. Sorry folks, not really in December, but anyway. And lo, the angel of the Lord came upon them, and the glory of the Lord shone about them, and they were sore afraid. And the angel said unto them, Fear not, for behold, I bring you good tidings of great joy, which shall be to all people. For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Saviour, which is Christ the Lord. And this shall be a sign to you. Ye shall find the babe wrapped in swaddling clothes, lying in a manger. And suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of the heavenly host, praising God and saying, Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill to men, toward men. So interesting there how some kind of announcement, and this is really this is where faith comes in, because as far as we know, there's no natural phenomenon that could actually be responsible for something like this. But one way or the other, the shepherds knew about this. And it came to pass, as the angels were gone away from them into heaven, the shepherds said to one another, Let us go now even unto Bethlehem, and see this thing which is come to pass, which the Lord hath made known unto us. And they came with haste, and found Mary and Joseph, and the babe lying in a manger. And when they had seen it, they made known abroad the saying which was told to them concerning this child. And all that heard it wondered at these things which were told them by the shepherds. But Mary kept all these things, and pondered them in her heart. And the shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all the things they had heard and seen, as it was told unto them. So the shepherds come to visit. They find in this town, now if it's in a house, how are they going to find? Going door to door. Just wonder whether this is perhaps some embellishment, right? The angels, the shepherds coming door to door. Shepherds are important. Remember, David himself was a shepherd. And of course, Jesus is seen as a shepherd of his people. So it's perhaps a very metaphorical thing that shepherds, who are also very low layer of people in society at that time, that the writer, so Luke or whoever wrote that gospel, is trying to show that Jesus was not just a highborn king who only went around with highborn people, but bringing in this lower level of people and kind of sharing that with everyone. And then we get to the part of Luke where that we don't often talk about, but is still an important part of the Christmas story. And when 8 days were accomplished for the circumcising of the child, his name was called Jesus, because that's the name that the angel told Mary and Joseph they should use, which was so named of the angel before he was conceived in the womb. And when the days of her purification according to the law of Moses were accomplished, they brought him to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. As it is written in the law of the Lord, every male that openeth the womb shall be called holy to the Lord. And to offer sacrifice according to that which is said in the law of the Lord, a pair of turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. Now, this is an interesting part. So after 8 days, Jesus was circumcised. That's, as we know, the bris. That is a Jewish tradition. But then we also have the days of purification for Mary, and this was a period of 33 days for a boy, 66 for a woman. Yes, we did have differences in those days. I'm sure the feminists wouldn't like that today, but there was a difference: 33 for a boy, 66 for a... And until after those 33 days and then some ritual purification, Mary could not go to the temple. And one of the things that they needed to do at that point was to offer a sacrifice. And in actual fact, the sacrifice they talk about here is the sacrifice for the woman, not actually for the child. And they offer a pair of turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. Talmudic or Jewish law states that it should be a goat and a pigeon, or what was the other bird, or a turtle dove. But if you couldn't afford it, then you did 2 turtle doves. So that's interesting that Luke's writing there, rather than the more expensive goat and a turtle dove, he talks about the 2 turtle doves. So again, is this more metaphor trying to show that Jesus is of the people and not highborn? Was Joseph not that rich? Maybe he wasn't. The stories are that he was a carpenter. Maybe he didn't have that much money. Anyway, so they do that. And then, let's see, verse 225. And behold, there was a man in Jerusalem whose name was Simeon, and the same man was just and devout, waiting for the consolation of Israel, and the Holy Ghost was upon him. And it was revealed unto him by the Holy Ghost that he should not see death before he had seen the Lord's Christ. And he came by the Spirit into the temple, and when the parents brought in the child Jesus to do for him after the custom of the law, he then took him up in his arms and blessed God and said, Lord, now lettest thou thy servant depart in peace according to thy word, for mine eyes have seen thine salvation, and what thou hast prepared before the face of the people, a light to lighten the Gentiles, and the glory of thy people Israel. And Joseph and his mother marveled at those things which were spoken of him. And Simeon blessed them, and said unto Mary his mother, Behold, this child is set for the fall and rising of many in Israel, and for a sign which shall be spoken against. Yea, a sword shall pierce through thy own soul also, that the thoughts of many hearts may be revealed. So again, was this something that actually happened? Was this something based on the prophecies, or was this just something that was added by the writer, by the author of the gospel, to kind of underline the fact that Jesus was indeed a special child? Again, we'll never know about that. Very interesting. But just to make sure, the writer added one more. And there was one Anna, a prophetess, the daughter of Phanuel of the tribe of Asher. She was of a great age, and had lived with a husband 7 years from her virginity, and she was a widow of about 84 years. So she'd lived with a husband for 7 years. He died, and then she'd been a widow for 84 years. And she was a widow of about 84 years, which departed not from the temple, but served God with fastings and prayers night and day. And she coming in that instance gave thanks likewise unto the Lord, and spake of him to all them that look for redemption in Jerusalem. And then Luke finishes off. And when they had performed all things according to the law of the Lord, they returned to Galilee in their own city Nazareth. This is where it becomes interesting, because this is where it kind of is slightly different to Matthew's description. So let's have a look at what Matthew says. So here we have verse 2.1 of Matthew. Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east, and are come to worship him. When Herod the king heard all these things, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And when he had gathered all the chief priests and scribes of all the people together, he demanded of them where Christ should be born. And they said unto him, In Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written by the prophet, And thou, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, art not least among the princes of Judah, for out of thee shall come a governor that shall rule my people Israel. So, very interesting there. These wise men come from the east, and of course they come to Jerusalem. They're looking for a king. They go to the capital city, and of course Herod, who's the king at the time, says, I don't want another king. I'm the king. So he's not happy about that, obviously. Now, one of the things that's missing here, and of course, let's think about it. All our nativity scenes, we have the three kings coming to the stable. Jesus still in the manger. Well, we're going to talk about that shortly. First of all, we don't even know whether it was three kings. We know there are three gifts, right? Gold, frankincense, and myrrh, but we don't know whether how many wise men actually came from the east. We know it's more than one, but because there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, but we just don't know how many. And we don't know when they exactly arrived. But there are some hints there perhaps as well. So we now know that Bethlehem was supposedly where the child was supposed to be born. But we don't know whether or not the wise men arrived before or after Joseph and Mary had gone to the temple for this ritual purification of Mary and the presentation of their son, basically, to the Lord in the temple. That could have actually taken place, and they could have been back in Nazareth by now. Anyway, so what does Matthew say? Then Herod, when he had privily called the wise men, inquired of them diligently what time the star appeared. And this seems to be an attempt to kind of say, well, the star appeared when the baby was born. But if they were in the east, and most people say they came from Persia or Babylonia, they wouldn't have been there overnight. So it would have taken quite some time, at least 30 days, but it could have taken longer as they came across the desert and came to Jerusalem. So remember the 33 days that Mary had to wait for her purification, and when they were done there, they left. So it could have been that Mary and Joseph had already been in Jerusalem and gone on to Nazareth. But now the wise men are getting sent off to Bethlehem. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, Go and search diligently for the young child, and when ye have found him, bring me word again, that I may come and worship him also. Yes, I think we both know what really he intended to do. When they had heard the king, they departed, and lo, the star which they saw in the east went before them, until it came and stood over where the young child was. So did the star lead them up to Nazareth instead of Bethlehem? Or might Jesus might they have been just inside the 33 days and that Jesus was still in Bethlehem? We'll never know, but it's interesting to think about it. And again, it kind of lends some plausibility. It isn't all myth. These are things that definitely could have happened. It's just that as it was written down a number of years after it actually happened, yes, maybe there are small twists and inconsistencies that should not detract from the whole story. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceeding great joy, which we of course see in some of the carols. And when they came into the house, now remember, he was supposedly born in an inn. Now he's coming into a house. The wise men coming into a house. So now he's living in a house. What house is that? Nazareth or Bethlehem? Interesting thoughts there. And when they came into the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented him gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And being warned of God in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed to their own country another way. And when they were departed, behold, the angel of the Lord appeareth to Joseph in a dream, saying, Arise, and take the young child and his mother, and flee into Egypt, and be thou there until I bring thee word, for Herod will seek the young child to destroy him. When he arose, he took his young child and his mother by night, and departed into Egypt. Well, very interesting there. If he had to rush off in the middle of the night, was he actually in Nazareth? Because if he was in Nazareth, he would actually go through Jerusalem on his way down to Egypt, and that would be very dangerous. Whereas on the other hand, if he was still in Bethlehem, he might not need to go through Jerusalem, and he could get away very quickly and have to move very quickly, because Herod was thinking that where the child was. And then, of course, the other thing is, the other part is the fact that Herod then, and I haven't got that particular verse, unfortunately didn't print out, but that next verse talks about the fact that Herod then killed all the children in and around Bethlehem who had the age of 2 or under. So this kind of indicates Herod had asked when the star had appeared, and he killed, it sounds like, basically all the children from when the wise men told him that the star appeared up to that point. So how long had they taken to get to Judea? Did they go up to Galilee? Who knows? They may have come, Jesus may have, because it talks about the young child, that could still, he could be 2 months, he could be 3 months, he could even be as old as 6 months, just depending on how long the wise men took over getting there. But whichever way it is, whether they were still in Bethlehem, whether they were in Nazareth, and they felt for safety they needed to go to Egypt. Apparently they did go to Egypt, and they stayed there until the death of Herod. And it was there until the death of Herod that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the Lord, spoken of the Lord by the prophet, saying, Out of Egypt I have called my son. So again, interesting that this story, which doesn't appear in Luke but does appear in Matthew, is Matthew here trying to perhaps bend the story to match the prophecies a little bit, and just having an excuse to say why prophets had in earlier times said this might happen. But we'll see. Okay, now here's the verse that I meant to talk about. Then Herod, when he saw that he was mocked by the wise men, was exceeding wroth, and sent forth, and slew all the children that were in Bethlehem, and all the coasts thereof, from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had diligently inquired of the wise men. And Then was fulfilled that which was spoken by Jeremy the prophet, saying, In Ramah there will be a voice heard, lamentation and weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, and would not be comforted, because they are not. So there's that section about Herod killing the children. Again, did that actually happen? It's not really recorded anywhere other than Matthew. So again, was this something that was introduced just to kind of bend the story to match the prophecies? Interesting thoughts. So let's go on with the final section of Matthew's Gospel. But when Herod was dead, behold, an angel of the Lord appeareth in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, Arise, and take the young child and his mother, and go into the land of Israel, for they are dead which sought the young child's life. And he arose, and took the young child and his mother, and came into the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus did reign in Judea, in the room of his father Herod, he was afraid to go thither. Notwithstanding, being warned of God in a dream, he turned aside into the parts of Galilee. And he came and dwelt in the city Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophets, He shall be called a Nazarene. So very interesting there again. Matthew seems to be introducing embellishments which really trying to bend the story to match the prophecies. So first of all, the fact that he went to Israel, and then secondly, that Jesus lived in Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophets, he shall be called a Nazarene. Now the prophets may have been right, who's to know? And maybe that is correct, but it does seem, let's say, strange that Matthew wants to emphasize these points so much. Most people at the time this was written down would probably know that from the Old Testament. Remember, at the time the New Testament was written, we didn't have a New Testament, so the Bible, the book that everybody, the religious book that everybody read, was the Old Testament. So they would know most of these prophecies. So why is Matthew writing this down and trying to emphasize these things? Is he adding it in, or is it definitely true? Of course, both Luke and Matthew do agree that Jesus did live in Nazareth. So that's one, maybe it's not an embellishment, but Matthew, as I said, is just trying to emphasize the fact that prophets in times gone by had actually said, yes, folks, this is going to happen. And Matthew's just reminding us that it did happen as such. And there's so much other of the whole story of Jesus' life that ties him to Nazareth, that it seems unlikely that this would actually be an embellishment. So, to me, it's interesting that there are aspects there where you can say, yeah, these things could be correct, right? The census did take place around the time that Jesus was born. Was it, would a census like that, would it just be a few weeks? It might have been that it was a whole year that they were actually registering people. These things, happen at fairly large intervals, 28 BC, 6 BC, 14 AD. If you've got those gaps, it could be that it's a 6-month period over which you need to go to your hometown, register, let them know where you actually live, and then leave again. So, if you think about the timing, did Joseph go and was it 6 months? Was it a whole year that you could register? Who knows? We don't know the details of that. At least I don't. And based on that, if you say, okay, maybe it was 3 BC and it took a whole year and then went to 2 BC, basically it gives us 2 years miscalculation in the actual birth of Jesus, it sort of makes it very strange that it, you know, it would be anything else. I mean, so this, to me, without going to faith, actually says, yeah, it is likely that there was someone like that there. Now, at the beginning of the show, I talked about Marco Polo and the book that was written, and sort of said it could be based on, you know, a number of true facts, but surrounded with embellishments, and a little bit here. But there's enough truth there that you sort of say, well, you know, whether you believe or not, there's definitely circumstantial evidence that there was a person called Jesus who existed, who was born around the time we expected. And, you know, and whether you believe that he was the Son of God or not, he had a huge impact on the whole world. And whether you think that maybe some of the apostles were adding embellishments to match the prophecies, or whether you think the prophecies are correct, like I said, there's still that circumstantial evidence that there was a person, and even if it were somehow some amalgamation of facts from different places, it still had a huge impact on the world, you know, possibly larger than any other religious text. I know that those that follow Muhammad might like to dispute that, but a very huge impact all over the world, based on some, you know, like I said, some facts that seem to support the story in spite of what may have been added. We've got a few more minutes, so what I'm going to do, I just want to go back now and pick some key prophecies that come from the Old Testament, and let's just have a quick look at them and sort of see how they match up with what actually happened. Of course, for me, the big one is Isaiah 9, 6 and 7. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and peace there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. You know, that's quite an important prophecy, but on the other hand, I have some aspects. If you take it too literally, I have some things that trouble me, because it says, he will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. In general, when we talk about the kingdom of David, we're talking about Israel. And so if you take this prophecy literally, it doesn't really connect, because Jesus did not rule over Israel. He did, right? He was not a king over Israel. Now, we all see him as someone who brought peace and was a wonderful counselor, a mighty God, an everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace over all of us. So that part of the prophecy does seem right. But, you know, again, maybe you don't take these things too literally, and when Isaiah was talking about David's throne and over his kingdom, maybe he meant that in a spiritual sense. But again, we'll never know, but it's interesting to see. Isaiah 7:14, therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will be with child and will give birth to a son, and will call him Emmanuel. And then Matthew, of course, writes, all this took place to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet. The virgin will be with child and will give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. Again, did they bend their stories to make Mary a virgin to match this prophecy? Was it a true prophecy? The other thing that kind of, again, if you take this very literally, they're talking about the fact that they will call him Emmanuel, right? Which means God with us, but they actually called him Jesus. We call him Emmanuel, and especially in the carols, and others may, but if you look at the actual story that's written in the New Testament, they don't mention the word Emmanuel there, except Matthew adding that to kind of justify the prophecy. So, interesting thought there. Micah 5:2, another prophecy. But you, Bethlehem, Ephrathah, even though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from old, from ancient times. So, again, this is one that's a little troubling for me, because it does kind of tie things in a little too much. Jesus never ruled over Israel. So, why are they bringing this one in? Who knows? Jeremiah 31:15. This is what the Lord says. A voice is heard in Ramah, mourning and great weeping. Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because her children are no more. And this is where Matthew pulls that one in about Herod killing off all the children. Again, with all the records that the Romans kept, no records of this ever having happened. Of course, we have to remember the local records that would have been kept in Jerusalem were, of course, probably destroyed when Jerusalem was sacked by the Romans a number of years later. But even so, again, was this an embellishment that was added in? Who knows? And then finally, Hosea 11:1, when Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. To me, that actually, in a way, that sounds more like Moses coming out of Egypt. But, and again, Matthew takes that particular prophecy and weaves it into the story of them going to Egypt. Did they or didn't they? I'm not sure. Does it really matter? I don't think so either. It's just interesting to know that it happened. Well, folks, I hope you've enjoyed this slightly different show this evening. I'm not a biblical scholar by any means, so a lot of this is just my own thoughts. But every Christmas you get round to this thought, well, it's a nice story. How much could be true? Angels up in the sky. Did that really happen or not? I mean, it is kind of, it is nice to think about, but it's also nice to know that there are serious underpinnings that say, yes, okay, there was a census, there could have been someone there at that time that might have done that. So, folks, I wish you a Merry Christmas. Please join me on the next show. Looking forward to talking to you in a week's time.
Thank you for listening to this edition of the Patrick Come Lately Show. Please take what you have learned and share it with friends and family. Better still, tell them about the show so they can listen too. Remember to support the advertisers on the show. It helps keep this show on the air, and I thank you for that. I'm looking forward to joining you on the next show. Until then, keep spreading our message. Goodbye, and God bless America.